Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation, and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another podcast. Today, I am joined by Cassidy. Cassidy is a speech and language pathologist and owner of Around the Spectrum Therapy, a private practice specializing in neurodiversity affirming care for children with complex communication needs. So you can see why I wanted to get her on the podcast. She has experience in early intervention, school-based therapy, and private practice. Cassidy is passionate about supporting children through child-led, strength-based approaches. She has extensive experience working with augmentative alternative communication, or AAC as it's often known, and coaching families and professionals on creating meaningful communication opportunities. Through her online profile Speech with Cassidy, where I found her, she provides education, resources, and training to help others implement affirming strategies that honor each child's unique engaging the world. You can see after rereading that why I wanted to have you on. I'm so excited that you're here. Hello, Cassidy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I cannot wait to have you on. This is my jam. I love speaking about this stuff. And your account is full. Like every time I see a post, I'm like, yes, exactly. So I have lots of parents and teaching assistants or paraprofessionals that listen to this. I have lots of mainstream teachers that listen to this. They might not know what AAC is. So do you mind explaining to us what you mean by AAC? It's a good place to start.
Yes, of course. And I actually get this comment a lot on posts that I make where people are like, everybody uses acronyms and I don't know what they mean. And I think sometimes it's easy as professionals to forget what it's like to not really know any of this kind of stuff. So AAC, as you said, stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And I personally feel, especially online, you kind of see it, and I'm guilty of this, of using that term to mean a communication device. It sometimes gets switched out for communication device, but that's not really what AAC is. It's really all encompassing of anything outside of verbal speech. So from even using some signs, gestures, all of that is alternative, to verbal speech, using picture cards, so some of that more low tech based stuff, some mid tech stuff that has a little bit of voice output but isn't as complex as an iPad communication based device, and then all the way up through what most people know as AAC is those high tech communication devices that people are using to communicate. And also, I think something to highlight with AAC and the definition of it is that augmentative and alternative. So it's not always just the alternative. It's not, okay, this child needs this to communicate and that's the only way they're communicating. A lot of times it is that augmentative. They have some verbal speech, but are supplementing it with any number of these, alternative methods.
That's a great thing, actually. Do you often use more than one with a person that you're working with?
Yes, all the time. It's very rare that a child, I can't even think of any kids in my caseload that just use one method. So it kind of just depends on the situation. I have families that the child has a communication device, but maybe they also have some pictures on the fridge of
Right.
food that they like to eat, and that's pretty quick and easy. I would really love using some of those buttons where you can record a message in. So maybe they'll have one next to the door to go outside. And so they can kind of use a mix of whatever meets their needs in that moment.
I often get the question, I don't know if you get this as well. Don't they find that overwhelming?
I always tell parents, I think we find it more overwhelming than the child does.
Yeah, I find the same. And same with like, I don't know, how many symbols is too many symbols and how many photos is too many photos. And I just think, imagine if they weren't there. Then
Right.
that would be overwhelming. Is that kind of a similar
Yeah,
answer?
and I think we never think that when it comes to children who just develop communication typically. We never think, oh, I'm using way too many words with them. So, I think really switching our mindset to this is also for input, not just for output. So they might not use all of these words, but we are still giving them that input of language. So it's important to have those words.
Absolutely. And I suppose maybe it comes from a fear of overwhelming them, because maybe these children find speech and demands and instructions quite overwhelming, leading to dysregulation. So maybe they've seen that and then don't want to do the same with AAC.
Hmm.
However, going visual first may not have that same effect
Right,
ultimately.
exactly. And I think it also depends on the approach that is taken as well too with anything. So if it's a very demanding approach, they may seem overwhelmed because they may just not be finding that connection with communication with it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it could be symbols, it could be photos, it could be recordable sound buttons, it could be iPads or equivalent. Is there any else I'm missing? A Makaton or a sign language you said?
Yeah, just like any gestures. Yeah, there's a lot of mid-tech options, and I don't feel
Okay.
like those are used as frequently though. I mostly use kind of those single message buttons, which you'll see in classrooms and stuff as well too. There's other things out there, they're just not as easily accessible. They actually tend to be kind of a high price range and they're not robust. So it's kind of, unless like a school has them, it's not something a parent is easily going to
Can
access.
we talk about that? Because these are things like, especially if we're talking about communication devices, there's a huge cost to that. I don't know. In America, sometimes it's through insurance. Is that right? In the UK, it's very much out of the parent's pocket or out of charity, through charity and donations. Sometimes it's through referrals, through speech therapy, but it's quite rare and it often takes years. So it seems unfair to wait when you know that they're going to be able to communicate in that way. So this is a clear barrier. So if somebody is listening and thinking, well, I know I want to do that, I think my child would benefit from it. Is there a good thing to implement straight away that's a lot cheaper whilst you're waiting?
It's definitely a huge area of need, and I'm very blessed that where I am, it's not as much a barrier as I've heard other people talk about. There is Weave Chat is a completely free AAC app. So if somebody does have access to, I believe they're on Apple and Android products. So if somebody does already have access to a tablet, downloading that app. It's still very robust and can be customized and stuff. So that can be a good way just to kind of at least get something to the child. I'm also a huge advocate for low tech supports. And this, I think people also, low tech equals PECs, and a lot of people aren't doing PECs and they use the term PECs incorrectly, and it doesn't have to be that very strict rigid protocol. We can implement a lot of low tech supports that you just need access to a printer and maybe a laminator in order to offer some of those supports, but those can be really great for kids.
Yeah, and I guess it's you're still teaching them that pointing and touching is communication too, and that's a great practice for when
Hmm.
they do receive their device that, you know, they're kind of used to that navigation through communication, I suppose. They've already started their journey before
Exactly.
you've paid for this hugely expensive device. I guess there's a reason I have spoken to the companies because I wanted to understand, like, why is it so expensive? Why is this huge barrier? There's so much that goes into it. It's incredibly in-depth technology and it is so great, and it has to be quick because there can't be any delay on when they've
Hmm.
touched it. It has to have lots of different voices. It has to, use so many different systems. They have to buy the licensing program for the symbols. Once you start going into it, then there's every reason why it is that expensive. We want it to be good. We
Exactly.
want it to be robust, don't we? We want it to be updated. It's
And a
just
lot
then.
of these companies also offer support outside of just, here's the device, but, they'll come for in-person trainings or remote support. So it's kind of like all of that is also encompassed in the price of it as well,
Which is so
too.
important because they say you giving someone a communication device is like giving someone a piano and just expecting them to play it. That's like
Mhm.
a common quote, isn't it? And it's so true. If you just bought an iPad and had the app on it, then the child isn't going to be any better necessarily at communicating than they were before. So, what kind of things do you do to support a child with a new communication device or with a new any AAC, I suppose?
Well, I'm very thankful that I work very closely with parents. So I think sometimes this can be a little bit different in the school based setting in some way, but I just think training the people around the child is much more important than trying to get the child to use the device. I see a huge difference in the progress with children communicating using AAC when it's very obvious that the adults around them are bought into it. Even if they're not seeing maybe the progress that they're expecting to be seeing, right away, but when they're really bought into it and are like, okay, like we're doing this, I'm all in, I'm going to learn about it, making that mindset shift of this might be something new, but I'm going to learn with my child or with the child that I'm working with if it's in a school setting. That's where I really see the biggest leaps of progress is when the whole team is on board and everybody's on the same page and everybody's willing to learn, even if they have, absolutely no idea what they're doing. So that's normally my focus originally is just how do we make this accessible for everybody else? Yeah, we want the child to use it and they're the focus, but if we don't focus on everybody else first, the child's never going to use it most of the time.
Yeah, it's so true. So many times I put the iPad in the school bag and send it home, and I know it's not going to come out again.
Mhm.
For whatever reason, sometimes, oh, but I know what they are asking for, or they just help themselves. And that's great. Like, that's lovely. We don't want to restrict children until they have to ask for it, of course. But I want you to use it. I'd love you to be modeling and using it. That would bring me so much joy, even if the child never looked at it or touched it over the weekend. But if the adult, whatever adult it was talking to them about what dinner they're having or what they're watching and commenting, and that's what we mean by that, isn't it? Is just the
Mhm.
adult just using it, just exploring it, playing with it, having it out, so that the child notices it maybe and is interested and learns what it's even for, I suppose. Otherwise, how would they know that it's any different than any other cause and effect toy?
And I like to set that expectation up right away when I am starting with a family that, I kind of always go for the most extreme, your child probably isn't going to touch this. Or maybe they'll touch it and just touch a million buttons, right? And so that way, if the child does use it in a way that they weren't expecting, it's exciting. But if they don't use it in that way, that's kind of what they were expecting. And I really tell families, like, my goal is for you guys to learn this and to not have it be a burden in your life, or really just to be a natural part of your life, whatever that looks like for you to start, to kind of decrease that overwhelm. But I find just being upfront about those conversations makes a huge difference because then families kind of know,
Yeah.
like, okay, well, what I'm seeing is normal.
Yeah, and it is unusual for a child to take to it well straight away.
Hmm.
Often they don't want anything to do with it, or they stim on it, or they whatever it is. Want to press every button to find out what it is. Whatever it is, it's very rare that a child will be given a device and the first time they say, isn't it funny that I want this? That would be really unlikely. It would be amazing and so exciting and awesome, but it is unlikely, isn't it? So it's setting parents up to, yes, they might not touch it, or yes, they might stim on it. Then when they see those things, they can be excited about those things, knowing it's okay, rather than, oh God, we spent all this money on
Right.
devices and speech therapy, and he's just playing with it as a toy. That, without understanding that's part of the process, that could become quite frustrating, couldn't it?
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a great idea to get them set up for them.
Hmm.
How do you know what system to try? So we've said there's loads of AAC out there. We've got a minimally speaking child. What do we try first? What's a good thing to, yeah,
I feel like this is
explore?
a loaded question.
It might be.
Because as a speech therapist, I think because I've had so many years of experience with familiarizing myself with systems and getting systems for children, that it's almost like my brain just like automatically processes all of this information and is like, yes, this is the one that I'm going to try. And sometimes for me to be like, well, why am I thinking that way? And being able to explain that is another thing.
Mm,
And it really depends. Sometimes I do like to look at, okay, is this child in a school system? Are they in a classroom? Or is there any familiarity with any sort of program? That shouldn't be the end all be all necessarily for choosing one. But if the entire classroom is using one program, maybe it's worth trying that program and seeing if they're successful. And if they're not, we can switch gears and try something else, but they might have better support if we're going with what everybody in the classroom is used to. I live in an area where there's a very high Spanish speaking population. So I'm always looking at the bilingual aspects of that. So TD Snap has a really, really great bilingual component that is, you can switch very quickly between languages. And that is usually high on my list of priorities if I have a family that is bilingual, especially a lot of the families here, one parent might not even speak English at all. So if I want them to use it, it needs to be in the language that they are using at home, as well as the language, that the child is going to be experiencing in school. Also look at some of the motor planning things as well too. Do I feel like this child will benefit from a more motor planning based system, like LAMP, where it's always snapping back to the home page, that organization of it, just based on some other, characteristics that that child has. But I typically like to consider a few different systems and then say, okay, I think this one, might be a good fit for this child and try it out. But there's been times when, we're going through this trial period and I'm like, it just doesn't feel like it's, I feel like there's something else that we could try. And
Yeah.
so I think also knowing it's okay to switch gears and not be like, well, this is the one I decided on,
Yeah.
that's why that period exists, to try these out and be like, okay, well, let's switch and see, what system might work better and try a different one and see if we have a different outcome. But sometimes, honestly, you don't know. And I think as speech therapists, it's okay to feel like I don't really know what system is the best one. And maybe I had this trial for 4 weeks with a child and they didn't touch it or look at it at all. And I have no idea what to pick. And at the end of the day, you kind of just have to use your best clinical judgment and then say, okay, well, once we get the device, like, I sometimes think there are kids where there is a program that this is the perfect fit for the child, but most of the time, the perfect fit is going to be the one that's implemented by everybody
Yeah.
else. So,
Yeah. Ultimately, it's if everyone else is using it, then that's going to be the benefit. There's no point having the perfect program and no one else is using it.
right,
I think that's
exactly.
makes so perfect sense. I think that's really great advice. Yeah, what are they using already? What is around already? What are their adults around them competent with or can access? Because ultimately, if that's not happening, the child isn't going to be able to
Right.
access it either. And then, yeah, motor planning is a really great, I hadn't considered that. But of course, if a child doesn't have the dexterity to single out a single image on maybe a communication device, or then maybe symbols on blocks is a good idea, or objects is a good idea, or something like that. So, yeah, it is individualized, isn't it, ultimately?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, trial and error. So have a hypothesis, but then put it to the test rather than deciding before you've even tried it. I think, it's why trials exist. Exactly what you said.
Exactly.
Have you ever seen really fast progress with access to AAC?
And it tends to happen with people who should have had it much younger. I used to work in a school system and I mostly worked at the middle and high school level. It was a specialized school just for autistic individuals. So I had kids up to the age of 21 and adults. Some of these individuals had not been given access to high tech AAC and they may have been 14, 15, 16 years old or even older. And for some of those kids, sometimes it really was as simple as just like, I'm just going to put this in front of you and see what you do with it. And I did have a couple instances where, pretty immediately those individuals were putting full sentences together.
Because they'd been using symbols, books maybe, and they'd been
Right.
using communication books, and they'd been using iPads all separately, then it kind of makes
Right.
sense to them,
And
I
they were just
guess.
older and had more exposure to language, compared to maybe the 2, 3-year-old little ones that we have. So I have seen that as well too. And I've had some kids where, like you said, they are immediately touching it the second that you put it in front of them, but maybe it's not in the way that we're, expecting that to look like. And so it kind of just depends, I think, what that progress looks like.
I'm having something at the moment where I've got a people in my class who's been using it maybe for a few months. I'm using a communication device for about a few months. And he's really great. If we model to him on a single page, he can navigate it and finds it again and knows that he's doing it to request and to comment on like nouns. So he'll find an animal or he'll ask for a squeeze, for example. But he's really struggling to navigate between the folders. And we're finding that to be a barrier. Now we can continue showing and modeling through the folders, but actually what we're kind of going to is we're doing that for him and then finding him the page that he wants. I don't know if that's right. Have you got any advice for me personally on that?
Two pieces of advice that I normally give people for this. Kind of a caveat behind it is sometimes it depends on the system. Oh, is the system like you have to go 6 folders deep to get something? Because that is a lot for me, as an adult. So sometimes before even getting to what should I do, it's looking at the system. And
Okay.
that's kind of where it comes in, where when I'm talking with families, and back to what you had first asked about it feeling overwhelming, the more icons we have on a screen, the less navigation it actually requires to go into things. So sometimes looking at that and seeing like, okay, could we add more icons to each screen and then it requires less navigation? But two strategies that I typically use with kids when I feel like they're ready to be navigating and we just can't quite cross that bridge. One strategy I use is narrating out loud. So if I'm modeling the word open, I might say actions, page 2, open. So I'm actually narrating exactly which icons that I am pressing. Or for an animal, things, wild animals, tiger, saying that out loud and really slowing down while I'm doing it. And another strategy, I guess this kind of could fall under a level of prompting. And I think being careful to know, like, okay, this child is really trying to express this. And this depends on the system, but if there's a search feature, a good search feature, so Proloquo to go, really anything outside touch chat, the touch chat search feature often does not lead you the easiest path to get to a word.
Yeah.
But for the other programs, sometimes what I've done with some kids is search the word, and then when you click on the word, it actually will highlight it and black everything else out. And I will then encourage them, to be able to walk through that motor
Yeah.
plan. And there's nothing else on the screen that can be kind of throwing them off. But sometimes just getting over that initial difficulty with it. But those are the two strategies I
That's really
usually
great
try.
advice. That's really great advice. Yeah, we use Proloquo, so using the search
Proloquo to go
function
is
is
one
a
I do it
really
with a
great
lot.
idea.
So if you search
Yeah.
it, it'll highlight, and then you click on, which word, it'll highlight the motor plan pathway to get there. And I've had a lot of good success with that with
Okay,
kids.
that's really great advice. Thank you. Just using it as my personal questions. I love it. But how do you work alongside parents? You mentioned parents before. Are they in the sessions with you? Do you work at the home? Did they come into your practice? How does that look? And what considerations need to be made there?
So right now with what I'm doing, so I'm full time in my clinic. So prior to that, I was doing early intervention, which here is birth to 3. So I was going into homes, and now I'm full time just in my office. So what it looks like currently is every child that I see, the parents are bringing them to my office. And I always tell parents when they first start with me, I don't have a waiting room. So I kind of say it as like a thing, like, because if you walk in, you're going to walk into a session. So people are used to like a doctor's appointment, having
Right.
to go in and fill out paperwork and wait. And I don't have a waiting room just because my office is small. There was really no other reason. It's not like I purposely don't have a waiting room, but it has created this really great environment where parents are just in the office, So it's not like they're in a separate room and they have to make that decision of if they want to join or not. Like they're just there. They have no choice but to be there.
Because ultimately,
And
you want them there. You want them to see,
exactly.
because otherwise, it's completely unique and you could do some great work. But if it's not going to be taken outside of the room, it's kind of pointless, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that came from doing that in-home stuff where the focus really is on parent coaching. I wanted to bring that over to the older children that I work with. So some parents I work with, they might just, sit in the chair the whole time and they're watching or listening. Some parents are right on the floor and it's kind of their prerogative of how the level of involvement that they want in that moment. And sometimes it switches, moms coming in with babies. Sometimes they're taking care of the babies, but they're hearing everything and they're seeing everything. So I like to, as soon as possible, get them involved, even if they're not sitting on the floor with us. But especially because I use that more play-based child-led, I find myself explaining a lot out loud. This is why I'm doing this, like explaining the reasoning behind certain things and explaining the strategies that I'm using to them. And I found that when parents can really see it in action, it makes a lot more sense than just bringing the child back out to the waiting room and, 5 minutes. Hey, here's what we did. Here's what you can do at home.
Off you go.
Most
Yeah.
parents, I think, probably just walk out of that waiting room and what you said went through one ear and out the other. And it's not because they're
Yeah.
bad
No,
parents.
that's what I'm saying. It's not for want of trying. It's just, oh, you're the therapist. Like, I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to like mess it up. I don't want to ruin it for them. But of course, that's not what it is. It's we're all learning and we're all trialing and error. And actually, often the parents are the expert in their child. They might not be a speech therapist, or they might not be a trained teacher, but they are the expert in their child, and they certainly know what motivates them. And it's the parent. I've met the most incredible parents who didn't choose to have a neurodivergent child, but my God, do they do a great job. And and it's almost like it's showing them and telling them and giving them confidence in to do it, that this, you know how to do it. You do such a great job. Can you do, like, could you try this? Or maybe they suggest things. Maybe they're naturally doing things already. I've met so many parents of Gestalt language processors who naturally will repeat back what they say. And I'll say, has someone told you to do that? No, we just do it. We just have like our own little conversation, our own language. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's so awesome. You don't even know how awesome you are. And I think I see that a lot in parents. I'm sure you do too. You just see little looks, little body language things. Like, they just totally read their child like so well.
Right.
It's awesome.
And I think it also helps with carryover as well too, because the parents, what I try to do is really break it down into something very simple that they can do. I had a family come to me one time that was seeing another speech therapist, and the mom was wonderful and she was so overwhelmed, and she was like, I wanted this AAC device, and the speech therapist wasn't super knowledgeable, but I was able to fight for it and I got it. And she was like, and now I don't know what to do. She was like, the speech therapist is just telling me, well, you just have to model all the time. And she was like, that's what we say. And she was like, I don't even really know what that means. And she was just really struggling with, it almost became this all or nothing approach. Like, if I'm not doing it 24/7, then it's not enough. So
And
I'm just
also,
so
that also
overwhelmed.
means that if the child isn't taking to it, then that's like on her because she hasn't been modeling
Mhm.
enough, or because she hasn't been doing it right, which is such a big responsibility when it might not even be like you said before, like it might not even be the right system. It might not even be the right, communication tool. Like, that is
Right.
such a huge weight to put on a parent who already is, I'm sure, consumed by a hell of a lot of decision making in the day.
Exactly. And I think when we can break it down, like, okay, your child loves animals, let's just show them the animal sounds page. And that might not
Great.
really have any importance on them being able to ask you for things at home, but it brings that joy to it. So you don't feel overwhelmed. They don't feel overwhelmed. And you feel like, okay, I feel like I want to do this at home, not like
Yeah.
I have to.
And it's meaningful for the child as well. That is
Mhm.
what the child would be saying if they could talk. They would be
Exactly.
talking about animals. So let's talk about animals.
Yeah.
We have a student in my class who is obsessed with logos, like loves logos and adverts. It's amazing. Like, they're all the American adverts. He knows all of them. Like, it's awesome. I love it. He has an incredible brain. And when he got the AAC device for the first time, he was typing the logo names or the brand names and hearing it back, because sometimes they're said wrong and sometimes they're said right, and he just thought it was the most awesome thing ever. So I was like, oh, but he's not using it to communicate. Like, he's using it, but he's not using it to communicate. I'm like, that is what he would be saying if he had a words. Like, if you take this device from him, you are putting your hand over his mouth. Like, you would never do that to a child. This is genuinely what he would be saying if he had a voice. He would be talking about logos all the time. He would be talking about brands all the time. He'd be recalling the adverts all of the time because that is his interest. That is what he likes to do. That is him talking. Like, he's not going to say, hello, Jordan, how was your day? Would you like a drink? It's just not going to happen. Like,
Right.
he's not motivated by that. To offer him a page of logos maybe that we could talk about with each other, would be really motivating to him. But yeah, just like animals, or sometimes food is the motivation, or
Mhm.
sometimes theme parks is the motivation, you know,
Right.
toys to get taking photos of all their personal toys maybe is the motivation. You know, I think that's really great, and it's such a joy because all of a sudden it doesn't feel overwhelming anymore. All of a
Mhm.
sudden the child is interested. All of a sudden you're having a conversation and you're relating to each other, which ultimately is what communication is, isn't it? It's two-way. It's talking about your interests, it's engaging, it's motivating, all of those things.
Right, exactly. I have a video somewhere on my Instagram page of a little girl touching a button where it said achoo to sneeze, and I was pretending to sneeze every time she touched it. And I just felt like it was such a good example that sometimes what we think communication should look like or AAC implementation should look like often is not, reality. And she was so excited and was touching it over and over again. And like you said, like getting that two-way back and forth communication. And that will lead down the road to, her asking for help and water and some of those things. But it starts with seeing that power of I do something and it causes this reaction that I really like that I want to continue to happen.
So true. It's talking about difficulty navigating folders. One of my students was having that, one of my other students, but then all of a sudden could find stinky fart really quickly when we were using whoopee cushions. And I thought, my goodness, you could do it, but you just weren't motivated before. But all of a sudden you get the whoopee cushion out and you can find stinky fart, like 2 folders of
Right.
stinky and fart. Like he was doing it, and I was like, do you know what, mate? That's on me. I just wasn't being fun enough.
Exactly.
And ultimately, like they are 8, 9, 10-year-old children. Like they're gonna like burps and farts. Like maybe that's the way to go. It definitely made me smile. It was a really lovely moment. And I thought, yeah, of course, you're not motivated by whatever I'm trying to talk about,
Right.
shapes or colors or something stupid. Of course, you're going to want to talk about that. What is one thing, or maybe a few things, maybe that's mean. What is a few things you wish everyone who supports minimally speaking children knew?
I think one of the biggest things is to know that these children are communicating. I've never met a child that isn't communicating in some form or fashion. And I think sometimes we look at these kids that aren't talking and we just think that they're not communicating, but a lot of times they have very rich communication skills that just aren't verbal. And so, really recognizing and honoring what their communication looks like before we dive in and say, well, this is what I want their communication to look like. Let's see what their communication already looks like,
What kind of things would you
naturally.
be seeing, do you think? I know what you mean by that, but I'm just
Yeah.
like, what might be happening?
So when I do evaluations, I use a system where I'm observing the child with myself or with a parent. So again, it kind of I get the parent involved right from the get-go and writing down everything the child is doing. So I'm looking at any sort of gestures beyond just like, the more sign or something like that. Are they taking mom's hand and moving it to something? Are they pushing, a toy away? Are they getting up physically and moving their body when you introduce an activity? That's communication. They just might not have the word no or be able to say anything else. Are they crying? Are they making vocalizations, happy or sad in either direction? Are they leaving the room? So looking at like that proxemics, method of communication, they want to go on the swing, so they're just walking over to the swing, or they want a toy out of the cabinet, so they're going to walk over and try to, open the cabinet, reach up for things. A lot of times I'm also looking at what are their eyes doing. So if, they're looking at the shelf, are they looking at one toy and just not quite sure, like, it's too high, I can't reach it, but I don't have any communication skills outside of just looking at it to be like, hey, this is what I want. But they're communicating, they're showing that, hey, I want this toy, I'm staring at it. And, how can we continue to develop that while also honoring the ways that they are using?
Yeah, I guess that also will lead you on to then choosing a system to try that kind of matches what they're already doing. So
Mhm.
maybe if they're already using their pointing finger, well, then it would be a really great idea to maybe put a communication board in place. Or if they're walking over something and reaching, maybe have a sound button that they can then press
Mhm.
once they get there. So it's maybe looking at what already you're seeing and then fitting around them rather than pulling them to us. I really like that. And it's something that I think I do naturally, but I never do it intentionally. So I think that might be something I start doing now, is having some kind of audit for exactly that. I think it's really important. And to get the parents involved and or the paraprofessionals and the teaching assistants involved in that, I think could really empower them as well to see that this child is communicating, and how are they doing that. So then maybe we're a bit more in tune
Right.
with
I
the
talk with
child.
parents a lot. I just had a conversation with a parent last week, and I think as professionals, paraprofessionals, really anybody that works with some of these minimally speaking kids, something so powerful that we don't do often enough is just observe and just wait. And you can learn so much. And especially when kids aren't talking, it's very easy to want to fill that gap and you end up leading a lot more. And when I had this mom here and the child was playing, had walked over to a toy that we had used before, but we weren't quite sure what he wanted to do with it. I said, just take a moment. I said, want you, I, I don't want either of us to say anything. Let's just wait a few minutes and see what he does. Does he play with it independently? Does he try to get us involved in his play? What does his play look like with this toy and what does he want to do with it versus, us saying, oh, here's how you play with this. I said, and then once we figure out what he's doing, then we can join in. And what he ended up wanting to do was it's this little fan thing, turn it on and off. And normally it has tubes that connect to it for a ball to shoot through. And he wasn't interested in that part of it. But that would have been our first thing, like, oh, let's go get the tubes and attach it onto here. But because we step back and observe, and then I could show him on his device, oh, you want it turned on. And he picked up on that word so quickly, whereas that would have never even been an opportunity for us to have if we were so quick to jump in.
Yeah, you're so right. And I'm so guilty of that too. And
Me
in my
too.
room for sure, because you don't want them to fail, do you? I mean, you've created an environment where they can't fail. So I don't know why we're so scared of it, but you don't want them to not succeed. But by doing that, we're failing them, aren't we? Because we're not letting them show us what they can do or what they know, or being led by them. And I know you're an advocate for this too, of child-led play, and observation and waiting is a lot of that, isn't it?
And it's hard. It's hard
It's
as adults.
hard. It's really hard. Even like waiting 10 seconds, processing time is hard if you count it in your head. It feels like a really long time to wait.
Mm-hmm.
But observing and waiting for a child could be minutes of
Mm-hmm.
just waiting and not helping them. For example, you spoke a little bit about prompt dependency. I know you didn't go into that, but trying not to have them be prompt dependent, because they might work it out, or they might find a solution that it might not be the solution that you would do, but they might find a solution on their own. And if you prompt too much, then they'll become reliant on the prompt, and then they'll never be able to maybe do it on their own. Things like zips are a classic example with their coat. The first thing we do is zip you up, without even giving them a chance to even like try to put the little thing in, and because we think they're going to fail at it. What that tells them is, you can't do this, you need me.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they do need you, maybe they'll come and find you, or maybe they'll find another adult, or maybe they'll, whatever. But no, I think that's really great advice, and one I'm definitely going to take on board. I kind of use these podcasts as CPD for myself, and that's going to definitely be my homework for this week, is to observe, just to give myself the permission to sit back and observe. And even if an adult comes in and questions it, I can be confident enough to say, observing this, I'm observing his communication so that I can better meet his needs, or better understand it. You have that answer, but have that confidence just to sit back and wait is really great advice.
Yeah, and you're so right with being able to explain it. And I think that's where a lot of speech therapists feel uncomfortable with that, especially when they're working with parents and being able to say, this is why I'm doing this and this is what I'm hoping the outcome will be. And it makes sense to parents. Every parent I've had that conversation with, they're like, yes, I just like never thought about it that way, or I didn't have to do that for my other children. But because this child has more needs, more communication needs, they actually tend to observe less and wait less. and as speech therapists, we feel if every moment isn't productive, then it's not a productive session. And a lot of it, I think just with AAC in general, child-led therapy, anything is really shifting our mindsets.
Yeah, which I love, and it can only improve the mental health and life for these young people that we have the pleasure of working with. Thank you so much, Cassidy. This was such an awesome chat. I hope our listeners get a little flavor of what you are about. If they want to find out more, which I'm sure they will, where can they find you?
The best place is to follow me on Instagram. Speech with Cassidy is kind of my professional side of my Instagram. I have one for my practice as well too, but that's where I'm posting a lot of AAC stuff. I recently dived into some more storytelling stuff, more related to parents. And then I have a website as well too, which is just speechwithcassidy.com.
Did you say that you have a new product coming out or a new
Yes, I
information?
just came out with a high-tech AAC Made Simple ebook. So it's 140 pages of everything I wish I had when I was first starting out with AAC. So it really dives into the basics of AAC through principles for customization, implementation for AAC that feels very practical to implement, not again, just like model all the time, some of that kind of stuff, but like actually what might this look like? How can we fit this into this child's life? Troubleshooting, handouts, really all encompassing AAC.
That's awesome. Can you send me the link and then I'll put it in the description to this below so that they
Yes,
can
I will
check
do
that
that.
out? That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome.